The Valari Dominion had once been a proud and powerful civilization. Their cities floated between the stars, their fleets guarded entire sectors of space, and their people believed their strength would last forever. But when the swarm came, everything changed. It started at the edges of their empire, small colonies going silent, mining stations vanishing without a trace. At first, the Valari thought it was piracy or some local rebellion. But soon the truth became clear. It wasn't a rebellion. It wasn't pirates. It was something far worse. A living storm of machines and monsters that devoured everything in its path. The Valari Navy fought back, but their ships were old, their tactics predictable. Every time they sent a fleet, only silence returned. Within months, half their worlds were gone. Cities that had stood for centuries became ash in memory. The stars themselves seemed to dim with each loss. In the capital's command center, the last remaining admirals gathered. The room was silent except for the hum of dying power systems and the distant rumble of orbital bombardments. Outside, the skies burned red with enemy fire. They all knew what was coming, the end of the Valari Dominion. They had sent messages to their allies, the Zoran Republic, the Arathi Union, even the Keldan Empire, who had once sworn friendship and trade. None had answered. Some didn't dare. Others didn't care. The swarm was too powerful, too vast. Helping the Valari meant sharing their fate. So one by one, their supposed allies turned away, pretending not to hear their desperate calls. When the final decision came, it wasn't a plan for victory. It was a last act of hope. The High Chancellor ordered one more signal to be sent. It was a simple message broadcast in every known frequency, coded in 100 languages. It said only one thing: we are dying. If anyone can hear us, help us. No one in the control room believed anyone would answer. The message was more like a prayer than a strategy. It was sent into the cold, endless dark, into the silence between galaxies where sound and light disappeared forever. After the transmission, the crew sat in silence. Some wept quietly at their stations. Others simply stared into the holographic display of their burning homeworld, knowing there was nothing left to save. The Valari were a dying species sending their last words into the void. Hours passed. Days. Their defenses kept falling. One by one, orbital platforms went dark. In the great capital city of Valara Prime, people huddled in shelters as the ground shook from distant impacts. Above them, the last few ships of the Valari fleet held the sky, not to win, but to delay the inevitable. And then, something impossible happened. A signal came back. At first, no one believed it. The communications officer thought it was interference or an echo from their own broadcast. But then she froze, staring at her screen. The signal wasn't Valari. It wasn't from any known civilization. It was something entirely new, strange in structure, raw and unpolished, yet unmistakably intelligent. She called the Chancellor and the Admiral at once. They crowded around the console as the message began to decode. There was no anthem, no flag, no lengthy statement. Just a simple line of text, translated into the Valari language. Message received. Help is coming. For a long time, no one spoke. The words hung in the air like a miracle. The communications officer read them again and again, her voice trembling. Help is coming. The Admiral frowned, trying to make sense of it. The message came from a star system on the far edge of a forgotten spiral arm. A place so distant and insignificant that the Valari had never paid it any attention. Their maps labeled it as a single inhabited world orbiting a yellow sun, a planet called Earth. Who are they? Someone whispered. A lost colony? A scavenger world? No one knew. There were no records, no treaties, no trade logs mentioning the name. And yet somehow these unknown beings had heard their cry. Outside, the sky was still burning. The swarm's ships drew closer every hour. The Valari could see the enemy now. Vast living machines that glowed like molten glass, tearing through orbiting wreckage as they descended toward the surface. Every soldier and civilian knew it was only a matter of time before the swarm reached the capital itself. Still, the thought of help, any help, gave them something they hadn't felt in weeks, a spark of hope. Parents whispered the message to their children in underground shelters. Pilots repeated it to each other before taking off on suicide runs. Help is coming. It became a prayer, a promise, a final reason to fight a little longer. The High Chancellor ordered the message to be broadcast across every remaining channel. Every Valari alive heard it. Message received. Help is coming. The words echoed through bunkers, ships, and ruined cities. For a dying civilization, it was a miracle that made them stand again, even as the world crumbled around them. But deep down, some wondered what kind of help could come from such a distant, forgotten world. Could any species reach them in time? Could anyone stand against the swarm when even the greatest empires had fallen? The Admiral didn't know, but she looked out the viewport at the burning sky and whispered, "If they heard us, if they're coming, maybe the universe isn't done with us yet." Far away on that small blue world called Earth, the message had been received by listening stations hidden deep beneath oceans and mountains. Scientists stared at the alien transmission, their hands shaking. It wasn't a hoax. It wasn't noise. It was a real plea for help, from a civilization at the edge of extinction. Governments argued, militaries mobilized, and the world held its breath. For humanity, this was first contact. Not with conquerors or explorers, but with survivors begging for aid. It wasn't a greeting of peace or curiosity. It was a cry of desperation, and in that moment humanity made a choice. They didn't know who the Valari were or what war they were fighting. They didn't even know if they could survive a battle across the stars, but they understood one thing better than any species ever could, what it meant to be cornered, outnumbered, and desperate. So they answered. Calm. Simple. Determined. Message received. Help is coming. Those 4 words began a chain of events that would echo across the galaxy. For the Valari, it meant salvation. For humanity, it meant awakening to a universe that would never see them the same way again. In the cold silence between stars, the signal raced through the void, a promise wrapped in courage. The Valari didn't know who these strangers were or what they would bring. They only knew that someone, somewhere, had heard their cry. And for the first time since the war began, the Valari Dominion dared to hope. When the Valari first received the human message saying, "Help is coming," they tried to imagine what kind of aid these newcomers would bring. They pictured diplomats, maybe a few transport ships carrying food, medicine, and words of comfort. Some hoped for volunteers, brave people who might come to evacuate their children. But no one, not even the most desperate among them, expected what actually arrived. Days passed after the message, and the skies above Valara Prime remained a storm of fire and metal. The swarm continued to close in, blackening the stars with their endless fleets. The Valari defense lines had all but collapsed. Only fragments of their navy still fought, their captains refusing to surrender even as their ships broke apart around them. Then, one quiet night, a new signal appeared on the long-range scanners. The technicians in the command center didn't recognize the signature. It wasn't swarm technology, and it wasn't from any known empire. The energy readings were strange. Primitive in some ways, but also focused and powerful, like a hammer rather than a blade. The officer on duty froze for a moment before shouting, "Unidentified fleet entering the system." The Chancellor and the surviving admirals rushed to the observation deck. From the windows of the orbital station, they could see new shapes appearing on the edge of the system, dozens of them, then hundreds. At first, the Valari thought it was another swarm detachment, another wave of death. But as the images cleared, their fear turned to confusion. The ships didn't look alive like the swarm vessels. They were made of hard angles and metal plating. Their hulls were covered with scars, dents, and burn marks as if they had already survived countless battles. They carried no bright colors or flowing banners, only a single mark painted in white, a simple blue circle with green streaks across it. "Who are they?" whispered one of the younger officers. A voice came over the comm channel, translated roughly by their systems. The accent was strange, the tone calm but firm. "Valari, Command. This is the United Earth Fleet. We have received your distress signal. We are engaging the enemy. Stay clear of the upper orbit." Before the Valari could respond, the human ships began to move. They didn't glide gracefully like the ships of other advanced races. They moved with heavy, deliberate thrusts, brutal, practical, and efficient. Their hulls glowed red from re-entry as they pushed forward, engines roaring louder than any ship the Valari had ever heard. And then, as if the universe itself took a breath, every human ship opened fire. Blue-white beams cut through the dark like lightning. The first volley hit the swarm fleet so hard that sensors on Valara Prime overloaded from the light. The sky turned white, then black as debris rained down in burning streaks. The swarm, used to easy victories, suddenly found itself being torn apart by weapons built not for intimidation, but for pure destruction. The Valari's scanners couldn't even process the scale of the assault. Human cruisers formed tight formations and fought with perfect coordination. Their smaller ships darted between the swarm vessels, drawing enemy fire and retaliating with missile strikes that cracked open massive biological warships like eggs. The swarm tried to counterattack, but the humans didn't break formation. Every shot, every maneuver was measured and ruthless. The Valari engineers and soldiers watching from the ground couldn't believe what they were seeing. The newcomers weren't sending diplomats or peacekeepers. They hadn't come to talk. They had come to fight. Down in the command bunker, the Valari admiral whispered to the chancellor, "They're not defending, they're hunting." The human ships didn't hesitate. When swarm reinforcements arrived, the humans didn't retreat. They accelerated toward them. They fought like beings who had known war all their lives, who understood that mercy was not given freely in battle. Every shot they fired carried intent. Every explosion spoke of vengeance. Hours passed, and the once endless swarm began to crumble. The Valari watched through shattered windows and failing sensors as the dark clouds of the enemy fleet broke apart, piece by piece. The space above their world, once filled with death, now glittered with burning wreckage. The humans didn't stop there. When they detected swarm carriers trying to flee, they pursued them. When the enemy tried to hide behind Valari's moons, they sent ground teams to root them out. The sound of their engines filled the sky, deep, thunderous, alive. To the Valari, it was terrifying and beautiful at the same time. They had never seen such fury used in defense of another species. Most civilizations fought only to protect their own, and even then with hesitation. But the humans fought as if the destruction of the Valari was a personal insult, as if someone had dared to harm their own kin. By dawn, the swarm was gone. What had once been an endless fleet of terror was now nothing but drifting debris and dead silence. The Valari cities, half in ruins, glowed with the light of fires and the strange shadows of the human warships passing overhead. From the ground, civilians stood outside their shelters, staring up at the sky. They saw the human ships slowly circling, scanning for survivors. Some people wept openly. Others just stood in disbelief. Their minds struggled to accept that help, and real help had actually come. Inside one of the human ships, Admiral Kara Voss watched the readings on her display. Her face was hard, her voice steady. "Target area secure," she said. "Enemy neutralized. Begin humanitarian drop." Moments later, hundreds of small pods detached from the fleet and fell through the atmosphere. They carried food, medicine, and communication units for the surviving Valari. But they also carried something else, the unmistakable message that humanity had arrived. And they would not stand by while others were slaughtered. The Valari leaders tried to contact the human admiral to thank her, but communication was limited. When they finally reached her, all she said was, "We came as fast as we could. You're safe now. Focus on rebuilding." Her tone was calm, but behind her eyes was something fierce, a quiet rage that no one could quite explain. As the Valari watched the human ships reposition themselves into defensive formation, they began to understand the truth. Humanity was not like the others. They didn't see war as politics or conquest. To them, it was survival, something written into their very nature. Their ships weren't pretty. Their technology wasn't elegant, but everything about them spoke of resilience and defiance. That night, on the broken plains of Valara Prime, the survivors looked up at the human fleet glowing against the stars. Some whispered prayers. Others simply watched, trying to imagine what kind of world could create beings so fierce, so relentless, and yet willing to fight for strangers across the galaxy. The next day, the Valari scientists began studying the human transmissions more closely. They discovered that humanity came from a place called Earth, a small blue planet covered with oceans, storms, and countless dangers. A death world, as some called it, a place where every creature had to fight to survive. Suddenly, it all made sense. The humans had grown up in a world that tried to kill them every day, and instead of breaking, they had adapted. They had become strong enough to fight anything, even the swarm. As the Velari ship sent their gratitude through the channels, the humans didn't reply with celebration or speeches. They simply stayed silent, patrolling the skies, repairing their ships, and preparing for the next wave. To the Velari, they were saviors. To the swarm, they were death itself. And to the galaxy, soon to learn of this battle, they would become something far greater. The Deathworlders, the species that came from the most dangerous planet in the stars and fought as if vengeance itself had taken form. The war that followed was long and brutal. When the first human fleet arrived, they turned the tide of battle, but victory did not come easily. The swarm was vast, endless, and relentless. For every enemy ship destroyed, another two appeared. The humans didn't retreat. They stayed side by side with the Velari, fighting until their ships broke apart and their soldiers had nothing left to give. The Velari had never seen a species fight like this. Most galactic armies valued precision and caution. They avoided unnecessary losses. But humans fought differently. They fought as if every battle was personal. They didn't wait for reinforcements or perfect conditions. If an enemy threatened civilians, the humans charged in, even when outnumbered or outgunned. It was madness by Velari standards, and yet it worked. Every hour, human voices filled the comm channels. Orders, battle cries, sometimes laughter in the middle of chaos. Hold the line. Keep firing. They don't pass us. The Velari soldiers listening couldn't understand how they found the strength to keep going after losing so much. Many human ships fell from the sky, burning as they entered the atmosphere. Some crew stayed behind to manually control their damaged vessels, steering them into enemy formation so the rest of the fleet could survive. When Velari rescue teams arrived, they often found only silence, shattered hulls, names engraved on metal plates, and the faint echo of recorded transmissions saying, "Tell them we held the line." The Velari began to realize that these humans were not fighting for territory or reward. They weren't there for politics or fame. They were fighting because someone had asked for help. And to them, that meant something sacred. Admiral Kara Voss, the commander of the Earth Fleet, became a name the Velari would never forget. She was not what they expected of a galactic leader. She didn't wear shining armor or golden medals. Her uniform was scorched, her left arm was replaced with a mechanical prosthetic, and her eyes carried the calm of someone who had seen too many battlefields. She was a Deathworlder, a survivor of a planet where everything tried to kill you from the moment you were born. Kara rarely spoke in long speeches or gave emotional orders. Her commands were short, sharp, and final. She led from the front, often on the bridge of the most damaged ship where others refused to go. Her crew followed her without hesitation. During one of the bloodiest days of the war, the swarm launched a full-scale assault on Velara Prime. Thousands of enemy ships poured into orbit, blotting out the sun. The Velari defense lines were collapsing, and the city shields were failing. The human fleet, already heavily damaged, stood between the swarm and total destruction. The Velari command begged Admiral Voss to retreat. "You've done enough," they said. "If you stay, your fleet will be destroyed." She refused. Her voice came through the static-filled comm channel. "No one conquers what we protect." Those 7 words silenced everyone in the Velari command room. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't pride. It was a statement of belief, a truth carved into the soul of her people. The humans had seen extinction before. They had fought plagues, wars, disasters, and even each other. They understood loss in ways few other species could imagine, and because of that, they refused to let anyone else face it alone. When her fleet repositioned, the humans didn't fight defensively. They launched a counterattack knowing it might be their last. Fighters dove straight into swarm carriers, destroyers rammed enemy cruisers, and ground forces volunteered for suicide missions to hold key positions. The sky became a graveyard of fire. From the surface, the Velari watched as bright streaks of burning metal cut across the heavens, the last stands of human ships giving everything they had. One Velari commander whispered, "They fight like their world depends on ours." By nightfall, half the human fleet was gone. But so was the swarm. The battle had ended, not because the Velari were stronger, but because the humans refused to fall. When the fires settled, the Velari search teams moved through the ruins. They found Admiral Kara Voss standing among the wreckage of her flagship. Her uniform was torn, her face covered in ash, but she was alive. Around her lay the remains of soldiers and engineers who had stayed to defend the ground base until the end. A Valari officer approached and asked quietly, "Why did you stay? Why risk everything for us?" Kara looked out over the destroyed city, the smoke rising like ghosts into the sky. She didn't answer right away. Then, in a voice soft but firm, she said again, "No one conquers what we protect." Those words spread faster than any official message. Soldiers repeated them over comms. Civilians wrote them on walls. Even children whispered them like a prayer. The phrase became a symbol, a reminder of what the humans had done. For the Valari, the meaning of Deathworlder changed that day. Before the war, they had heard the term used by traders and explorers, a way to describe humans as dangerous, violent, unpredictable. Monsters, some said, but after seeing them fight, the Valari understood the truth. Deathworlders were not monsters. They were survivors. They came from a world that had tried to destroy them again and again, with storms, beasts, diseases, and wars. And instead of dying, they had learned to endure. Every challenge had forged them into something unstoppable. They didn't fight for conquest. They didn't fight for glory. They fought because they couldn't bear to watch another world die, while they still had strength to give. That was what made them terrifying and beautiful. Weeks later, as the Valari buried their dead and began rebuilding their cities, they set up a monument at the center of their capital. It wasn't made of gold or marble. It was made from pieces of wrecked human ships, melted together into a single towering structure. At its base, they carved the words of Admiral Kara Voss, "No one conquers what we protect." Valari children grew up hearing the story of the humans, the Deathworlders who came when no one else would. Pilots painted Earth's symbol on their ships. Soldiers wore small patches shaped like human insignias on their armor, a silent show of respect. Across the galaxy, the story spread. Some called the humans heroes. Others called them dangerous. But everyone who heard the tale learned one thing. Deathworlders were not just a rumor or a legend. They were real, and when they chose to fight for you, they would fight until there was nothing left to give. And though Admiral Kara Voss and her fleet eventually departed, her words remained etched in Valari history. Generations later, when new threats arose, the Valari soldiers would repeat those same words before battle, a promise born from the blood and fire of that terrible war. No one conquers what we protect. It was not just a phrase anymore, it was a vow, a legacy left behind by the deadliest species in the galaxy, who fought not because they had to, but because they refused to let anyone else face extinction alone. Months passed after the final battle. The skies above Valara Prime, once filled with fire and destruction, were now calm again. The swarm of that unstoppable wave of death and chaos was finally broken. Its ships drifted silently through space, shattered and lifeless. What had once been an army that consumed entire worlds was now nothing more than dust and wreckage scattered across the void. For the Valari, it felt like waking up after a nightmare. Their cities were in ruins, their oceans poisoned, and millions of lives had been lost. But they were alive. For the first time in years, they could breathe without fear that the next sunrise would be their last. The humans stayed for months after the war ended. Not to rule, not to control, but to help rebuild. They moved through the ruins, clearing debris, restoring power grids, and treating the wounded. Their engineers repaired orbital stations, their doctors shared medicine, and their soldiers helped deliver food to remote colonies that had been cut off during the fighting. The Valari couldn't understand it at first. In their long history, no species had ever come to their aid without demanding something in return. Empires always wanted territory, resources, or political loyalty. But the humans asked for none of that. They refused payment, they didn't claim a single city, and they didn't raise their flag over any captured ground. When the Valari Chancellor tried to offer them tribute, precious metals, rare elements, even whole moons as a sign of gratitude, Admiral Kara Voss simply shook her head. "We don't want your worlds," she said. "We want you to survive." The Valari didn't know how to respond. In their culture, favors were always traded. Help was never free, but the humans were different. They weren't interested in power or wealth. They were only interested in ensuring that no one else would ever face what the Valari had endured. Human engineers installed new, planetary defense systems, powerful enough to detect and destroy any future swarm incursion. They left orbital satellites filled with supplies, energy reserves, and medical stockpiles. They even constructed a massive station in high orbit, fully automated, to watch over Valari space in case another threat appeared. And then, one morning without ceremony or warning, the human fleet began to prepare for departure. From the surface, the Valari people gathered to watch. Thousands of silver and black ships lifted off one by one, forming patterns against the stars. It looked like a migration, a flock returning to the dark from where it had come. Before leaving, the humans sent a single transmission, broadcast across every Valari channel, every satellite, every orbital system. It was short, but it carried more weight than any speech or treaty could. We answered your call. Remember who we are and what it costs when we rise. For a long time, no one spoke. The message repeated twice, then faded into static. The Valari leaders stood in silence, realizing that this was the humans' way of saying goodbye. They weren't asking to be remembered as saviors or heroes. They wanted the Valari to remember the cost, the lives lost, the sacrifices made, and the fire that humanity carried when it chose to fight. In the following weeks, life slowly began to return to Valara Prime. Children played in the ruins of old plazas. Farmers began to clear the ash-covered fields. Cities were rebuilt, stronger and more unified than before. And above them, in orbit, the message from Earth remained, repeating once every solar cycle, a reminder of the day the Deathworlders came. The Valari scientists studied the human technology left behind. It was simpler than they expected, but incredibly efficient. Everything the humans built had one purpose: survival. The defense grids were rugged and self-repairing. The supply caches were designed to last for decades. Even the communication systems were easy to use, made so that any survivor, no matter how untrained, could send a distress signal. It was as if the humans had planned for every possible disaster, because they knew what disaster felt like. Some Valari officials proposed making an alliance with Earth, but when they tried to reach them, the humans didn't respond. Their fleets had vanished into deep space, leaving behind no coordinates, no promise of return. It was as if they had appeared only for the war, fought their battle, and then disappeared back into the shadows of the stars. Still, their presence was felt everywhere. In Valari art, new songs were written about the warriors from the Blue World who fought without asking for reward. In schools, children learned about the Deathworlders, not as monsters, but as protectors forged by impossible worlds. The phrase, "Remember who we are," became part of Valari culture. It was carved on memorials, printed on walls, whispered in ceremonies. It didn't just mean remembering the humans, and it meant remembering courage, sacrifice, and the will to fight for something greater than yourself. The part of the message that said, "What it costs when we rise," struck the deepest chord. The Valari had seen the cost firsthand. Thousands of human soldiers had died defending alien skies. Entire ships were lost in battle, their crews gone forever. Humanity had paid in blood to protect a species that wasn't even their own. And that was what made them truly frightening, and truly noble. The humans didn't fight because they had to. They fought because they chose to. And when they rose to war, the entire galaxy trembled. Months later, when Valari deep space scouts explored the outer regions of their sector, they found signs of what humanity had done after leaving. In systems that had once been under swarm control, they found wrecked enemy hives, destroyed by precision strikes. It was clear that the humans hadn't just saved Valara Prime. They had hunted the swarm across multiple star systems until it could never rise again. In one abandoned swarm world, Valari explorers discovered a human beacon still active. When they played the recorded message, it was the same voice, calm, steady, and strong. "Admiral Kara Voss," her voice said, "if you find this, it means we kept our promise. The swarm won't return. You are free. Live well and remember, and strength is not in power, but in standing for those who cannot." That message became a sacred recording, played at every remembrance ceremony. The Valari didn't worship the humans, they respected them. They called them the Watchers Beyond the Sky, beings who came when all others turned away. Years passed, and the Valari rebuilt completely. Their cities shone again, their fleets patrolled the stars, and peace returned. But they never forgot the dark days or the strangers from the Blue World who saved them. Even centuries later, Valari ships would still carry a small human symbol painted on their hulls, a blue circle crossed with green lines. Not as an act of submission, but as a symbol of unity. A sign that when the universe falls silent, there is always someone who will answer. And high above Valara Prime, those human satellites still circled the planet, endlessly transmitting the message that had become legend across the stars. We answered your call. Remember who we are, and what it costs when we rise. That line became a truth whispered through generations, a reminder of what happens when the deadliest species in the galaxy decides to stand up, not for themselves, but for others. It was a promise carved into history, a warning to those who would bring war again, and a comfort to those who still feared the dark. Because everyone who remembered that message knew one thing for certain. If humanity ever rose again, the stars themselves would never be the same. Across the galaxy, stories of what had happened on Valara Prime spread faster than light, from one communication relay to another, from traders to soldiers, from smugglers to diplomats. Everyone was talking about it. The tale of how the humans, the so-called Deathworlders, had answered a desperate alien cry for help became the most discussed event in known space. No one could agree on what the humans really were. Some called them saviors, protectors who had come from a world so dangerous that only the strongest could survive. They had crossed the stars to fight a war that wasn't theirs, saving billions of lives in the process. To many, they were heroes. But to others, the story sounded more terrifying than inspiring. Those people didn't call them heroes at all. They called them monsters. Every empire, every federation, every kingdom across the stars had heard the recordings. The battles fought, the swarm destroyed, and the strange human message left behind. We answered your call. Remember who we are and what it costs when we rise. That message became the center of endless debates. What did it mean, what it costs when we rise? Some believed it was a warning, that when humans went to war there was always destruction no matter which side they stood on. Others said it was a promise, that humanity would always come when the helpless called for aid, even if it meant burning down half the galaxy to do it. In the great halls of the Thrixan Dominion, the High Council replayed footage of human warships tearing through the swarm. The Thrixans were a proud warrior race, but even they felt a chill as they watched the humans fight. The humans didn't just destroy their enemies, they erased them. Every move was precise, every shot efficient, every attack filled with purpose. There was no mercy, no hesitation, and no joy in the killing. They fought like a species that had seen too much death to ever take pleasure in it again. One Thrixan general reportedly said, "If they ever come for us, there will be no war, only extinction." On the trade world of Yeltor, merchants and travelers gathered in crowded cantinas, whispering stories of human bravery. Some claimed to have seen human medics tending to Valari children even while enemy fire fell around them. Others said that human soldiers refused to retreat, choosing to die holding the line so that civilians could escape. A bartender on Yeltor summed it up best. They fight like demons, but they bleed like us. The galaxy began to split into two opinions. One side saw Earth as a beacon of hope, a world that had survived chaos and learned compassion through pain. The other side saw them as a threat, a sleeping giant that could crush civilizations without even meaning to. In the halls of the Empire of Koresh, the Empress herself held a secret meeting with her advisors. They discussed how dangerous humanity could become if ever provoked. Their fleets were smaller compared to most empires, but their technology and tactics were terrifying. Reports said that human ships could operate in environments that would destroy most vessels: dense radiation fields, corrosive atmospheres, extreme gravities. Their biology alone was considered unnatural. They could survive wounds that would kill other species. And they thrived on worlds where everything else died. One Koresh scientist explained it simply. Their planet made them this way. They were born on a world that wants everything dead: storms, beasts, disease, even their own nature. But instead of dying, they adapted. They evolved. They became stronger. Now that strength protects others. As more details of the war leaked out, the galaxy realized something even more shocking. Humanity had gained nothing from it. No new colonies, no captured resources, no demands for tribute. They had come, fought, and left. That confused the galaxy more than anything. No species had ever done that before. On the distant moon of Sahrin, an old historian recorded the event into his archives. "Empires rise for power," he wrote. "Religions rise for faith. But humanity rises for neither. They rise because someone cried for help, and they heard it. Soon, songs and legends began to form around the humans. In the marketplaces of the Outer Rim, children pretended to be Deathworlders, shouting, "We rise," as they played. Holovids retold the story of Valara Prime with dramatic flair, painting the humans as mysterious warriors who vanished into the stars after saving the day. But in darker corners of the galaxy, the fear grew. Governments that had ignored the Valari's distress signal before the war now regretted their silence. They realized that humanity had noticed who stood by and who didn't. What if one day Earth remembered that silence? What if they decided that those who watched others die without helping didn't deserve mercy next time? Spies and diplomats quietly began sending envoys to Earth, hoping to build peace or at least understanding. Yet Earth remained silent. The humans didn't respond to most communications. They didn't brag or boast about their victory. They didn't seek allies or revenge. They simply returned to their world, or perhaps moved on to another crisis no one knew about. That silence was more frightening than any weapon, because it meant no one knew what humanity was thinking, or what would make them rise again. On countless worlds, leaders met in secret chambers to discuss new policies about Earth. Some decided to stay far away, never to interfere with anything involving humans. Others wanted to form alliances, to make sure they would be on the right side if the Deathworlders ever rose again. And a few ambitious empires began to plan how to study or even control humans, though those plans were whispered only behind locked doors, for fear that Earth might somehow be listening. Yet among the common people, the story was different. To farmers, miners, and traders, the humans were not monsters. They were the kind of legend that gave hope, proof that somewhere in the galaxy there existed a species that didn't turn away from suffering. A species that heard a cry for help and answered no matter the cost. In the archives of 100 worlds, scribes wrote down the story. The tale was recorded in every language, of how a desperate plea from Valara Prime reached across the stars, how a planet of death answered, and how that day changed everything. Over time, one single truth became legend, repeated in songs carved into monuments, and whispered by storytellers across every world. When the deadliest species in the galaxy answers your call for help, the war never ends the same way again. That line spread through the cosmos like fire through dry grass. To some, it was a warning not to provoke Earth. To others, it was a prayer, a promise that if darkness ever came again, the humans might return. On the world of Thalara, a child once asked her teacher what the line meant. The teacher smiled and said, "It means that hope can come from the most dangerous place in the universe. It means that sometimes monsters save the world." And so humanity became a mystery wrapped in myth. No one truly understood them. Not their motives, not their silence, not their compassion mixed with fury. They were both protectors and destroyers, saviors and monsters. But one thing was certain. Once they entered a war, it never ended as it began. For the Valari, that truth was written into their very history. For the empires that once ignored them, it was a nightmare they prayed would never come true. And for humanity, it was simply their nature. To rise when others fall, to fight when others hide, and to change the course of war forever. Across the galaxy, the fires of that legend still burned. Every species that heard it knew the same silent truth. If the Deathworlders ever rose again, the universe would tremble, not out of hatred or fear, but out of respect for the species that taught them all what it truly meant to fight for life.